The feeling around Celtic over the last few days has been a strange mix of disbelief, frustration, and that familiar sense of supporters trying to make sense of decisions that do not quite line up with expectations. Going through the January window with a title race still very much alive, and then seeing the club record no transfer spending at all, is something that naturally hits hard. It is one of those moments where fans stop and ask how a club of this size, with these ambitions, can allow a window to pass without backing the squad financially, especially when rivals are always looking for marginal gains. That contrast between expectation and reality has left a lot of people deflated, and that mood has been hanging in the air ever since the deadline passed. At the same time, it would be unfair to say nothing happened. A lot did happen, just not in the way many supporters hoped. Celtic ended deadline day bringing in 3 players, all on loan, all with their own stories, their own baggage, and their own points to prove. That in itself says a lot about the strategy being followed, whether people agree with it or not. This was not a window about statement signings or big money moves, but about short-term solutions, calculated risks, and players who, for one reason or another, are trying to get their careers back on track. The first arrival, when looked at chronologically, was Junior Adamu. He comes in on loan from Freiburg until the end of the season, with an option there if Celtic decide to make the move permanent later on. Adamu is a striker whose name might ring a bell for those who keep an eye on European football. A few years ago, there was real excitement around him, particularly during his time in Austria. Born in Nigeria and raised in Austria from a young age, he came through the Red Bull system, joining Salzburg as a teenager and featuring in the youth competitions alongside players who have since gone on to bigger stages. His spell at Salzburg was solid rather than spectacular, but there was enough there to earn him a big move to the Bundesliga. Across his time with Salzburg, he picked up league titles, played in Europe, scored important goals, and showed himself to be a forward who brings more than just finishing. The numbers were respectable, not explosive, but respectable enough that Freiburg invested heavily to bring him in. That move, though, has not worked out. In Germany, his confidence seemed to drain away. Goals became rare and minutes inconsistent, and suddenly a player once tipped for big things found himself needing a reset. That is where Celtic come in. At 24 years of age, Adamu is not an untested youngster, but he is also not a finished product. There is a sense that the club believe they can unlock the version of him that once looked so promising. He is not a pure penalty box poacher, and nobody should expect him to suddenly become a prolific goal machine. But he does offer energy, movement, and a willingness to work that could fit well in domestic matches. The fact it is a loan softens the risk. If it does not work, the club can walk away. If it does work, the option is there to make it permanent without scrambling in the summer market. What also stood out was the way he presented himself upon arrival. Calm, confident, smiling, speaking with a sense of gratitude but also hunger. That might sound like a small detail, but in a dressing room weighed down by negativity, those small details matter. Fresh faces can lift standards, lift mood, and subtly change the atmosphere. And Celtic will hope Adamu can contribute in that way as much as anything else. The second addition was at centre-back, with Benjamin Arthur arriving on loan from Brentford. Quickly nicknamed by some as Big Ben, he is very much a player brought in for depth rather than immediate impact. At just 20 years old, his senior experience is limited. He came through the lower leagues, earned a move to Brentford, impressed at youth level, and was rewarded with a new contract and involvement with the first-team setup. However, Premier League minutes have been scarce, and most of his exposure to senior football has come in domestic cup competitions. Physically, he fits the profile managers like at center-back. He has height, strength, and decent recovery pace, and those attributes alone can be useful in the Scottish game. But realistically, he arrives as cover. With injuries and departures leaving Celtic light at the back, the squad simply needed another body who could step in if required. Expecting him to suddenly become a long-term solution would be unrealistic. If he gets minutes, learns the demands of the league, and offers reliable backup, that would already be a successful outcome for this loan. The third signing, announced late and surrounded by far more discussion, was Norwegian winger Joel Vuka. He joins on loan until the end of the season, again with an option attached. His career path follows a pattern that has become increasingly familiar. Early promise in Scandinavia, impressive performances that caught the eye, a significant move abroad, and then a difficult period where form and confidence dipped. At Bodo Glimt, he was part of a side that impressed in Europe and even faced Celtic, though his role at that time was limited. Still, there was enough potential there for a French club to invest heavily in him. That move has not gone to plan. His numbers in France are underwhelming, his influence faded, and he has found himself drifting without a clear role. Celtic clearly see an opportunity to rehabilitate him, to give him minutes, structure, and belief. He is quick, direct, and comfortable carrying the ball, capable of playing on either flank, though his strongest moments tend to come when attacking space rather than operating in tight areas. Whether that translates consistently in Scotland remains to be seen. There was also plenty of noise around his medical history, something that understandably caused concern among supporters when reports surfaced. However, this is not a new issue, and he has been playing professionally for years since those early findings. It does, though, add to the perception that Celtic opted for caution, preferring a loan and a closer look rather than committing fully straight away. For some, that feels sensible. For others, it feels like another example of hesitation at a moment when decisiveness was needed. Looking at these three signings together, a clear theme emerges. These are players with points to prove. None arrive as guaranteed starters. None come with the certainty of immediate transformation, but all carry motivation. That approach has worked before at Celtic, producing players who exceeded expectations. It has also failed before, leaving the squad short when it mattered most. Which side of that line this window falls on will only be known in the months ahead, but what is clear already is that the pressure on this group, and on the people who assembled it, has only intensified. While the focus naturally falls on who arrived, the other side of the deadline day story is who left, and what that means for the balance of the squad going forward. Celtic saw several players move on, some temporarily, some permanently, and each exit in its own way says something about where the club sees these players fitting or not fitting into the bigger picture. These were not headline departures, but they do shape the options available for the remainder of the season, especially in a campaign where margins are expected to be tight. Johnny Kinney was one of those to move out again, returning to Bolton Wanderers on loan until the end of the season. There is no option to buy attached, and with his contract running for several more years, this move feels less about development and more about acceptance. He has had opportunities, he has worked hard, and nobody doubts his attitude. But at some point a club has to be honest about whether a player is realistically going to make the step required. This loan feels like the clearest signal, yet that his long-term future is unlikely to be in Glasgow. It gives him a chance to play regularly, to contribute somewhere he is wanted, but it also quietly closes a chapter that never quite took off. Stephen Welsh's departure is slightly different in tone. He returns to Motherwell on loan until the end of the season, a club where he is known, trusted, and likely to play. For Celtic, it makes sense. He had slipped down the pecking order, was not seeing minutes, and needed football. For Motherwell, it strengthens their squad, adds familiarity and leadership, and gives them stability at the back. For the player himself, it is about rhythm and confidence. Whether that leads back to a future role at Celtic or simply puts him in the shop window for a permanent move later remains to be seen. But for now, it is a practical solution for all involved. The permanent exit of Toby Oluwayemi also drew attention, not because of what he achieved at Celtic, but because of what some once hoped he might become. Moving on to Leyton Orient, his departure confirms that the goalkeeping hierarchy is settled, at least in the short term. The club clearly see no pathway there anymore. And while it is always tough to see young players leave without making their mark, this is part of the reality of modern squad management. With the window closed, attention inevitably turns to what this Celtic squad actually looks like now, stripped of speculation and grounded in reality. The goalkeeping situation remains unchanged, and that is an area of relative calm. At full back, there is depth, though injuries have tested it at times. The return of key players later in the season could offer a boost, but for now it is about managing workloads and avoiding further setbacks. Center-back is where the concerns grow louder. With injuries already biting and limited proven options available, the margin for error feels thin. Domestically, the team has managed to keep clean sheets, which suggests organization and discipline are still there, but questions remain about resilience against stronger opposition and the ability to cope with sustained pressure. The arrival of another young loanee adds a body, but not necessarily reassurance. and this area could yet define the campaign if misfortune strikes again. In midfield, continuity is the word, for better or worse. The core remains intact, experienced and battle-tested, but also familiar to opponents who know exactly what they are coming up against. There was a sense among many supporters that this was an area crying out for fresh energy or a different profile, someone to change the rhythm of games that become predictable. That did not happen, so the responsibility falls again on the existing group to maintain intensity, creativity, and control deep into the season. Out wide, the picture is mixed. On the right, options exist, but questions linger about whether there is a genuine difference maker there, someone who can consistently turn tight matches. The new arrival adds competition, but he also arrives with uncertainty, and it would be optimistic to assume immediate impact. On the left, injuries have narrowed choices, forcing players to adapt and shoulder more responsibility. This is an area where form, confidence, and fitness will need to align perfectly to avoid becoming a weakness. Up front, things look different from earlier in the season. The striker options now include a new profile, someone who may not score freely, but could contribute in other ways, linking play and pressing from the front. How that fits with the rest of the attacking setup will be fascinating to watch. It could unlock different patterns, or it could simply add another name to the rotation without changing outcomes. Much depends on chemistry and confidence, both fragile elements at this stage of the campaign. Taken together, this squad is not the one many imagined would emerge from a January window with so much at stake. There are gaps, there are risks, and there is a heavy reliance on things going right rather than being forced in Celtic's favor through decisive action. At the same time, football has a habit of surprising everyone. Players written off can step up, loans can outperform expectations, and a group under pressure can find unity and momentum in adversity. What is certain is that this is now the group tasked with carrying Celtic through the decisive months ahead, with no safety net and no excuses, as every performance, every decision, and every drop point will be viewed through the lens of a window that promised little comfort and delivered even less reassurance. Celtic have built success in the past on unity, on players stepping beyond perceived limits and delivering when expectation weighed heaviest. Whether this squad can do that again remains to be seen, but the path ahead is clear and unforgiving. The title will not be handed over out of sympathy, and rivals will sense hesitation if it appears. What happens next will define not just this season, but the trust between club and supporters, because windows close, but memories of how they were handled linger far longer as the campaign reaches the moments where everything is on the line. Before we proceed, subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to receive all exclusive news about Celtic FC. Don't miss any details about your favorite team. It's extremely important for Celtic FC fans. Whispers are doing the rounds in Glasgow that Martin O'Neill has drawn a hard line inside the Celtic dressing room, and it has nothing to do with tactics on the training pitch. The story filtering out of Lennoxtown is that smartphones have been quietly banned from the changing room. A temporary clampdown said to be driven by frustration at a side that has slipped off the pace in the title race and now finds itself chasing from behind, sitting third or thereabouts. Officially, no statement has been made, and those close to the club are careful to describe it as an internal adjustment rather than punishment. Unofficially, however, the word is that O'Neill believes the modern obsession with screens has crept too far into moments that should be about focus, togetherness, and edge. Music, messages, and social feeds, the argument goes, can wait until the job is done and Celtic are back where the manager feels they belong, on top of the league. Sources suggest the ban is not open-ended. Instead, it is being framed as a challenge to the squad. Reclaim the leadership of the table, restore the intensity that once defined O'Neill's sides, and the phones can return. Until then, players are expected to talk, look each other in the eye, and feel the weight of the shirt without a glowing screen breaking the spell. Some in the dressing room are said to have raised eyebrows. Others reportedly nodded along, recognizing a familiar old-school approach from a manager who built his reputation on unity and mentality as much as talent. Supporters, too, are divided. There are those who see it as a necessary shock to the system, a symbolic gesture aimed at sharpening minds. Others wonder whether such measures belong to another era and risk becoming a distraction of their own. For now, It remains a rumor carried on the cold air around Celtic Park, unconfirmed but persistent. Whether the phone-free policy truly exists, or whether it becomes another chapter in the folklore of a tense title chase, one thing is clear. NEILL is searching for any marginal gain to spark a response, and he is not afraid to challenge habits if it means dragging Celtic back to the summit. Hello, fan. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, as it means a lot to Celtic FC. Also, share your opinion about the news in the comments below. See you in the next video.